Good morning, everybody. I'm just want to give a quick introduction to our guest speaker here. A little bit of background. This is Tenzin Chogkyi. She is currently based in Santa Cruz and teaches now mostly throughout the Bay Area in Northern California. In her relationship with Lion's Roar is she is the teacher and director of our sustainable service program. And we are also merging that program now with our DELIC service program. So she will also be involved in that for the coming year. And we've got big plans for the coming year. So we've already got dates marked out. The next time that Tenzin will be here is the beginning of May. So it's coming right up. Her history is that of a Buddhist nun for about 20 years. She has taught the Dharma throughout the world, like New Zealand, Canada, India, Nepal. Yeah, you name it. Yeah, so she's traveled a lot. She's accomplished 2 3-year personal retreats. And I guess we would be probably most familiar with, we may have encountered her teachings at Vajrapani and Land of Medicine Buddha, probably most recently. So we're fortunate to have her here. She is a long-term friend of Lama Jimpa and now one of our main teachers here at Lion's Roar. So welcome, Tenzin Chogkyi.
Lama and I were shocked to realize we'd known each other for 20 years, which made us feel even older than we already feel and was kind of cool. And then we realized that I've been teaching here as of this summer. I will have been teaching here for 19 years, which is kind of amazing. That's when Lama first started inviting me to teach. So it's always such a pleasure to be back with all of you. The cast of characters has changed and added on over the years, and it's always a delight to be with you. And so when I was invited to teach this morning as Lama and I, as some of you know, often will do kind of a duet on Sunday mornings when we're both in town, but he's out of town, so you just got me this morning. And when I was asked, hey, you can talk about anything you want, I thought, oh, cool. Because one thing that's on my mind so much these days, as it might be on many others, is just this sort of conversation about bridging our very stark divides that have emerged in our culture around politics, around climate change, around any number of issues. And this has been really a focus of various projects that I've been doing the last couple of years, sort of emerging out of my work as a compassion trainer. Sometimes these days, that's how I identify myself, because that sort of feels like such a focus of what I've been doing. Many years ago, I ended up getting trained in a secular compassion training after all my years of teaching compassion according to the Tibetan Buddhist way of doing it. There's a Stanford University, with the encouragement of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a group of psychologists and educators teamed together with Geshe Thupten Jinpa to develop a compassion training. And that's been a big focus of my work in the last number of years. And one of the questions that always comes up, usually the first half hour of the 8-week training, is how do I feel compassion for somebody who's done great harm, right? Either to oneself or just in general. And at that point, I always say, pump the brakes, hang on. It's a process of developing compassion. But in these days, I'm finding, with the stark polarization going on in our culture, I think there's a lot that both the secular compassion training and Buddhist ideas can offer to help heal these divides. Because myself and many other people think that as long as we're approaching our culture in a zero-sum perspective, Like there's winners and losers, and we're just taking turns who happens to win any given game, election, issue, you name it, then nobody wins. You know, if we're just sort of seeing things from the zero-sum perspective and not trying to bring an attitude that says, hey, if we can somehow work together, if we can somehow understand each other more, we can somehow reach some common ground, maybe we'll be able to come to solutions for all of these monumental issues that our nation, just to talk about being an American, which I am, you know, and globally are facing. And just taking turns winning is no way to win, really, as a culture. And it's hard, it's challenging for sure. You know, the question of how can we even have empathy or even the willingness to understand somebody we see as other. The human need to belong. I always think about our fundamental needs. And what I want to do today, just to back up a little bit, is to talk about this topic a little bit and then guide you all through a meditation. And then we'll have time for discussion to see, you know, how it lands and what comes up. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is, you know, that we share the same basic human needs. We share the same emotions. Yesterday morning, I did a whole class on emotions, and we talked about these universal emotions. And we share kind of a short list, to be honest, of a list of basic human needs. And one of them is belonging. And that's a huge one. Drives a lot of our choices, drives a lot of our behavior. And it's interesting to look at this, you know, even just the political polarization, because sometimes people who do bridging work risk belonging to their own side, risk rejection by their own side. We almost have to be polarized in order to feel a sense of belonging in the political spectrum. One of my friends that I have done interfaith work with for many, many years, and she is very involved in peace work in Israel, Palestine, and she has two peace workers that tour together, and they're actually coming out with a book soon about their work. One's Palestinian and one's Israeli, and I've heard them speak in person several times. She sponsored their tours, and the Palestinian man has spoken with great sadness about all the connection he's lost with fellow Palestinians that don't understand how can he work with an Israeli? What is he doing? Touring the world, talking about peace with an Israeli. How can he do that, right? And so sometimes by being a bridge builder, we risk the belonging with our own so-called side, right? Because we all have our opinions, but can we somehow extend? One of my friends talks about grace, and I love this word that we don't use much in Buddhism. It feels like more of a Christian word. Can we have some generosity, some grace? One of the projects that I've been working on is a series of community conversations. So facilitating community conversations around difference. And the whole kind of brand of that project is called Listening with Curiosity, because this is one of the ways that we can do it. Can we actually be open to listen with curiosity to find out more about someone we might see as quite different from us? Sometimes we might even see as other in some way. Like, are we willing? And I think willingness is the first part. I mean, the skills of listening with curiosity, being patient, not trying to be right, really asking questions, sincerely wanting to understand. And I think that's going to be one of the first steps to bridging divides. Can we listen with curiosity? Because the idea in Buddhism is extending compassion to people we see as other depends on connecting to that common humanity, that we're all human beings, right? And the kind of judgment and polarization and the harsh language that we're all seeing really depends on seeing people as not quite human, right? Even some of the language that you see the posters at the marches. I can barely go to the marches anymore because it's the shaming, blaming, horrible, insulting people's looks and so forth on the posters. And I think, well, that's not, seeing that person as human. We almost have to do that to stay separated. Because as human beings, if you see someone as a human, we connect. That's our nature. Some psychologists say that our species name instead of Homo sapiens, because it's questionable how smart we really are, should actually be Homo empathicus, because that's one of our most characteristic features as human beings, connecting with other human beings. Through facial expression, body language, we can really pick up on the emotions of others, and we have this resonance and this connection. And it takes a lot of hard work to break that. We need to be very committed to breaking that and not being able to connect to others. So some of the ways we do that is with that kind of dehumanizing language. I was just reading this beautiful book I highly recommend by a Dutch philosopher called Rutger Bregman, and it's called Humankind. And it's an exploration of what is humanity's true nature. And he posits connection, empathy, and compassion. And it's full of all of this data around it. He's a historian and a philosopher. And he talks about in World War I, somebody did a study of guns in battle in World War I, and that was those horrible trench warfare things that went on and on and on. Something like 12% of the guns were actually fired. People wouldn't fire the gun at like even the opposite side. And then they changed the basic training after finding that out to encourage people to see the other side as less than human, because then they might be able to find, even in a battle situation, before you have to be really well trained to see the person as other, to be willing to harm them. So that just shows, brilliant book, this book, Humankind, really inspiring, if you're somebody who believes in empathy and compassion. And so one of the hugest steps in building those kind of bridges is listening to the other person with curiosity, dropping our judgment, really being curious, wanting to understand the other person, not just wanting to win a debate, but actually talking to the person that you see as other, getting to know more about them. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to agree with them. Really important. It doesn't mean that you're not going to still fight for what you think is right, but it just means dropping the kind of animosity and hatred and that leads to that kind of divisiveness. So this is really hard. Can we oppose someone's actions if we feel they're harmful without hating and judging and criticizing them? Can you hold compassion for the person and act sometimes really forcefully to oppose what they're doing? And that's the tricky part that needs a lot of practice and needs a lot of strategizing. Somebody yesterday in the class said, do I have to like everybody? And I was like, hell no. But do we have to have empathy and compassion and kindness? We need to aspire to that, even if you don't like them. You don't have to want to hang out and have coffee with them after work and hang with them. But can you extend to them empathy, compassion, understanding? And then it might be interesting to see if liking shows up with all of those qualities. And if we really are curious and really listen to others. There's a project that I've been working on for a number of years that is based on this idea of the human library, which some of you might have heard of. It started in Europe. I think it was during the Syrian refugee crisis. It was based on a well-known, many studies that says, if you see somebody as other, if you sit together human to human for half an hour and have a conversation, you can no longer hold those kind of strong prejudices and judgments and stereotypes. You get the humanity. And so this project started called the Human Library, and I've organized about 5 different events in Santa Cruz based on this project. And I remember once there was he was actually a Buddhist student who had been a prison guard in the Central Valley, and he came from like many, families in the prison in the Central Valley, multi-generational prison guard. His grandfather, his father, then he was a guard. And he got injured and took an early retirement and then moved to Santa Cruz. And the way he always framed it, he said, I'm way too conservative for Santa Cruz, but I'm too progressive for the Central Valley. It was like center or whatever, with this background of being a prison guard in the Central Valley. So we're having this event, and I was like, you should really come. It might be fun to come. So he came, and he was a little nervous. And so the way the Human Library works is you have people representing various identities, especially marginalized and misunderstood identities, that bravely agree to have a half-hour conversation with just a member of the public. There's guardrails, there's communication agreements, there's people, making sure it doesn't go haywire. It never has in any of the events that I've sponsored. And so there was a transgender woman. And so he goes, I've never actually talked to a trans person before. I think I want to talk to her. I'm kind of nervous. And I go, she's awesome. Like, go right ahead. So this trans woman had just come out recently as trans. She'd been married for 25 years, and she and her wife had a 23-year-old son. They stayed together after her transition, but she was out as trans in her workplace and with her family, but she never actually literally sat at a table with a literal sign in front of her going trans woman. So she very bravely volunteered to be part of this event. So he went to talk to her. Her son came with her because he wanted to make sure she was going to be okay. So he was kind of lurking in the background. He was adorable. So my friend goes to talk to her, and afterwards I was checking with him, and I said, how'd it go? And he goes, it was amazing. He goes, I sat down with her, and he goes, she immediately reminded me of my grandmother, because his grandmother was Salvadorian and this woman was Salvadorian. And so he was like, I sat down and she started talking, her accent, everything. They ended up talking about pupusa recipes for half an hour. They didn't talk about her being trans. He leaves and he was like, we didn't even talk about that. We just talked about Salvadorian food. And then he said, and I tell you what, though, I'm never going to have the same kind of whole idea about what trans people are like, because we had this warm relational, she was like my grandmother. It was amazing, this conversation. So that if we're willing, if we're curious, and one of the advices given is start with relationship, not with the issue. Don't go into a conversation with somebody who's other and immediately start talking about the issue that divides you. Establish a relationship first. And then you find if you get to that issue that's divisive, it may not matter nearly as much because you've started with relationship first. I have an example of that that came from my own life. For a number of years, I lived in Canada, in central British Columbia. I was still a Buddhist monastic at that point, and my best friend turned out to be the local Catholic priest because we actually met at a powwow. And I'd heard about him, as one does in central British Columbia, and I'd heard about him, and everybody kept saying, oh, you're going to love Father Derek. He's so awesome. And I'm like, great, can't wait to meet him. So I'm sitting there at a powwow in my robes with my Indigenous friends around, and I see this guy in a collar dressed in black with the, kind of walking towards me. He's not sure. I look over and I go, oh, Father Derek, I've really been wanting to meet you. And then that was it. So we were friends and we used to hang out and drink coffee and talk philosophy. And I remember after knowing him for maybe a year or two, it was when Pope Francis was first appointed, and he'd come out with this environmental encyclical, this whole thing about the environment. It was the first time the Pope had made all these statements about the environment. So we were excited and we're talking about that. And then I said, oh, and when he allows women to become priests, then I'm really going to be stoked. And then I look at my friend and I see the look on his face and I'm like, okay, so And of course, me being a Buddhist monastic and a lifelong feminist, my belief, my strong core value of women should be allowed to do whatever the blank they want in terms of their spiritual life, leadership roles, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Just assuming my dear friend would share my view. And then I looked at his face and I go, okay. And then I said, so what's that about? Why not? And he explained his theological justification that all priests needed to be male. I won't get into it because, you know, but and I said, wow, I said, thank you for explaining because I'd never understood why. I mean, to me, it just seemed, you know, ridiculous. So thank you so much. And then I opened my mouth and he finished my sentence and he said, so about this, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. Right? And we did. And we never talked about it again. But if it was somebody I just met who had that view, I might have chosen not to be friends. But I would have missed out on this incredible relationship with this beautiful person. But because we had established our relationship before even finding out that we had this issue that we had very different perspectives on, we were able to carry on. And I never really thought about it again. And it's a great example of how something that was such a deep core value for me that he didn't share turned out to be okay because we'd established a relationship. We saw each other as human, right? Another thing, so developing relationship, really listening with curiosity to understand. And another thing that's important in this work is embracing complexity, right? People are not reducible to a single story. You don't know what somebody is due to the color of their hat, or what t-shirt they're wearing, or what team they support, or even how they vote, right? There's a wonderful TED Talk by a Nigerian author, Chimamanda Adichie, called something like The Danger of a Single Story. And she talks about how when we reduce people to just, you know, one dimension, we're missing out on the complexity. So being open to the complexity, like I was with my Catholic priest friend, you know, very complex, including this view that I didn't agree with, but so much else that was amazing that I could connect to. And so we often, and you know, we know from Buddhism, from our teachings on perception, the human brain works in categories and we make quick determinations because we kind of have to. There's so much raw data coming in all the time that if we had to uniquely decide every time we walked into this room what everything was, oh, forget it. We'd be exhausted. So that which is familiar, we categorize and then dismiss, and we pay attention to that which is novel in our environment. So it's very easy for us to look at cues and clues and the color of a hat or a t-shirt or how somebody's dressed or what kind of music they like, categorize and dismiss. But we're missing out on the complexity of what human beings are. So just noticing that, again, it's the way our brain works, but we can slow it down and we can investigate and we can critique and we can, you know, be curious about other people because nobody is reducible to the single story, not any one of us, right? And so really, you know, acknowledging that. And then another thing is, and some of you have taken training in conflict management skills. It's one of the ones that I did for this year-long training that we just finished. And if we dig down to the human need, the value, what is behind the position, we might find common ground. In that training, and I'll have to do it here because I don't have my PowerPoint slide with me. In that training, we often talk about like two icebergs sticking up. Here's the water line. Two icebergs sticking up. What's above the water line, what's obvious is the position, right? Two different positions. And we're talking about people in conflict, two different positions. So what's above the water line are the positions, but what's underneath are needs, feelings, values, interests. And then we say, with enough digging, with enough curiosity, with enough listening, with enough questioning, we can find an overlapping need or value or interest. And we say that's in conflict management, we call that the collaboration sweet spot. Like we found something that we can say, oh, I care about that too. I care about harmony in my neighborhood. I care about, fill in the blank, whatever it might be. One friend of mine who does these community conversations in Montana around gun laws, gun rights. She, as you can imagine, in Montana is contentious. I think she's very brave. She goes off to these small towns, has these community conversations in these town halls, very polarized groups. The people that think the more guns, the better. My house is full of guns. I teach my kids to shoot when they're 7 years old, which was my case. My dad was from Southern gun culture, and we learned how to shoot when we were like 7 or 8 years old. And then another side is like, no guns at all. Everybody, or locked cabinet that only, a lot of regulations. And so what she finds over and over again, when she facilitates in a very specific way these community conversations, is she finds the common need on both sides, the common value is a safe community. One side thinks the way to have a safe community is for everybody to have guns. One side finds the way to have a safe community is for very strict gun laws. But she finds over and over again, when they realize that's what they all share, there's a softening of the adversarial energy. They don't always necessarily come to a solution, but there's a softening, and there's more understanding and there's more willingness to maybe come to a solution. And so finding that collaboration sweet spot in conversation with somebody else, finding that which you have in common, like my friend, Salvadorian food with a trans woman. There's always something, because we are human beings. There's a very short list of basic human needs. One social scientist that I really like, her name is Stacy Haynes. She works a lot with trauma survivors, and she uses a very short list of human needs: safety, belonging, and respect or dignity, or a feeling of being worthwhile. That's a pretty good short list. And I think most of what motivates us can actually be encompassed by that short list. So listening with curiosity, being open to the complexity of others, realizing there's not a single story, looking for the commonality in terms of our common humanity, connecting with our shared feelings and needs, realizing you may not ever come to an agreement about a given issue, but it's something you can put to the side because relationship is the most important. And I think if we all try to do this more, we'll be able to move towards the kind of culture we want to live in. I don't want to see the signs that I see at the marches anymore. I don't want to hear what I hear from the news reports, this vitriolic, shaming, blaming attacks. I don't think any of us wants to live in a culture like that. I just feel really good. I gave a talk kind of on this topic a couple of weeks ago, right before one of the big marches. And 3 of the students afterwards said, oh, great. Now I'm going to go home and change my sign. And I was like, yes. And they're like, we put some awful things on that sign. Now we have, lead with love. Oh God, okay. Empathy and compassion. I guess I have to go home and change my sign. But that's, a lot of the people that I admire these days, and I think this is what gives us hope in these times that are so challenging. Instead of just focusing so much on what we don't want, can we have more of a vision? One of the people that I like so much, her name is Garcia, and she gives these courses on what she calls the imaginal. Can we imagine the kind of world that we want to live in? Can we get creative about the positive things that we want? and focus more on that. And so it's moving towards that with a positive vision rather than just opposing. Of course, we have to oppose that which is harmful. We must stand up against that which is harmful. But I find if we're not leading with the vision of flourishing and of positivity and leading with love and leading with empathy and compassion, it's exhausting. It's incredibly discouraging. It's easy to lose hope and it's easy to give up. So it's hard when there's so much, I think, for many of us, and I'm not making assumptions about anybody's politics because I think on all sides, it's just a lot right now that we're facing, right? But if we can hold onto a vision and try and lead with that positivity and that love and, imagine what we're working towards. Alexa Garcia talks about caterpillars and these imaginal cells in the caterpillar that turns them into the butterfly. So as we all know, a caterpillar spins a cocoon and then it sort of just turns into this soup with these imaginal cells, like caterpillar soup. And one of the coolest things, and this is something to remember too, when we feel like we're losing hope. I didn't know this until like last year, and it was just mind blowing. The caterpillar starts to form the new form. And then it's like, nope, that's not quite it. And goes back to soup. And then it starts to form the new form again. It's like, no, didn't quite get that right. Goes back. Isn't that awesome? I'm like, what? And that can be true for us imagining the kind of world we want to live in. We might imagine, and then we're like, let's tweak this a little bit. Let's go back to like brainstorming stage. And collaboration is so important. That's one of the things I love so much about coming to Lions Roar, because you all have such strong community and relationships with each other. And one of the things I think with our like kind of ridiculous American mainstream individualist culture, we think, I've got to do it on my own. There's this sort of the hero's journey, and you're just standing there with your staff at the deserts in front of you. And it's never like that. We're always doing it in relationship and in community. So this work of creating the new vision of the future that we want to inhabit. Let's do it together. Let's have these conversations together. Let's talk about how do we lead with love. Let's talk about how hard that is to have compassion towards someone who's doing harm. That's one of the things that we're doing in the DELIC program, having these conversations together. How do we engage in compassionate action together to make that world that we want to live in? We've got to do it. Nobody's going to do it for us. We can't wait for anybody else. It's us. And it's us in community. I was reading something this morning in, my news feed, which unfortunately I read way too early in the morning. But it was something about like, why doesn't the Democratic Party have a really strong leader? And I'm like, forget that. We just all need to do it together, to create the kind of world. We can't just depend on somebody who's going to be, wouldn't it be great if we had heroes? And we do. And that doesn't mean we sit around and wait for somebody to come save us. We need to do it. And it takes all of us with that imagination, with that willingness. It takes courage. Sometimes listening with curiosity means you might agree with somebody that you think is other. And that can be hard. I remember, my politics are probably obvious. I'll out myself as a strong, progressive. Probably doesn't come as any surprise, not making assumptions about anyone else. But I remember during the President Trump's first term, and he did something I actually agreed with. And it was so interesting. It was something to do with prison reform, because I've been teaching in prisons for like 15 years up until COVID. And he did something really positive. And it was really hard for me to be excited about that. And then I had to look at that and go like, what's up with that? Be happy that he did this prison reform. So sometimes it's the courage to actually be willing to be changed or open to someone that it's easier to just exclude from your life. So that's a certain kind of courage too. Am I willing to be changed myself or to open my heart to someone that I see as harmful. So that's part of it too. So that's interesting. We need to really challenge ourselves, go outside our comfort zones in so many different ways if we want to create that world that we want to inhabit. So I want to guide you through a practice so we can do this together in practice. We're going to do just a short contemplation, maybe about 15 minutes, and then I'd love to open it up for reflections and conversation about this topic that I think from all the nodding and umming is resonating for a lot of us right now. So we'll open up and have a group discussion. But I want to just propose, how do we do this? How do we extend that grace, that openness to listening with curiosity, to investigating? So we'll try it with an example from our own life. And so what this is going to be is a guided contemplation, what we call in Tibetan Buddhism more of an analytical meditation. So not like focusing on the breath or focusing on one object, but I'll prompt you with things to think about. And so thinking of examples from your own life and just seeing how we can apply some of these ideas to our own examples. So I'll invite you to just get into a comfortable posture. You can either close your eyes or lower your gaze. If you're sitting down on a mat, have your legs crossed in a comfortable position. If you're sitting up in a chair, you can have your feet planted firmly, your shoulders even. And after settling into the posture, we'll just settle with a couple of moments of breath awareness meditation. So just following the sensations of the breath in the body as a way to just get present here in this room, in the present moment, in your body. So take a moment to bring to mind someone outside your circle of compassion, maybe even somebody who seems like they don't deserve compassion. And for this practice, don't pick the most challenging person. We're going to explore kind of our edge of where we feel to be. So not somebody that you have such strong reactions towards, but maybe somebody you feel might not be deserving of your compassion just because they're annoying, maybe inconsiderate or arrogant, or maybe it's somebody that you disagree with about certain issues. Maybe they have certain biases against groups, maybe a 4 or 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the most challenging person. So not going straight to 10 for this meditation, but picking somebody who's kind of mildly to moderately difficult for you. And if there are a couple of options, just focusing on one person for now. And as that person comes to mind, reflecting on what you find annoying or irritating or hurtful. Coming up with whatever the story is that you have about this person and their behavior or their words or their attitudes. What is it that you find annoying, irritating? And then as you're reflecting on this person, as they come clearly to mind, and You can visualize them seated in front of you or just get a felt sense of that person's presence. So the way you feel about them really becomes real. Noticing how you feel, what kind of emotions come up, maybe anger or judgment or annoyance. Just noticing what comes up as you imagine being with this person, either through generating a visual image or a felt sense of their presence. And what's the nature of the relationship? Thinking about the way you feel about them. And what is it like to relate to this person? Do you feel like you avoid them, or you get into arguments with them, or you just try not to be reactive, but you go home feeling annoyed after an interaction with them? How does it feel to be around this person? And how do you respond? And now take a moment to reflect. Are you aware of an unmet need that comes to your attention when you consider how you feel about this person's behavior? It might be that you have an unmet need for connection, or for belonging, or for safety. Maybe an unmet need for respect, or just feeling seen. Just pause for a minute and see what comes up. Is there some need that you have that's not being met in your interaction with this person? It might be the cause of your annoyance or irritation. And now we're going to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, extend some empathy to try and get an understanding of what's going on from the other person's perspective. And so reflect, is this person suffering? Do you feel that they're going through any unwanted experiences? Is there a way that they're also in their life going through challenges, unwanted experiences, maybe feeling disappointment, hurt feelings? Try to reflect what's going on from their side. And now try to imagine what feelings and needs the other person is expressing in the action or words that were the cause for your own anger or annoyance or lack of understanding. What do you think their feelings and needs were? And might their actions be the expression of some unmet need? You might have to guess, it's okay. It's just empathy means trying to connect with the other person's experience. So we may not know exactly, but Just trying to put yourself in their shoes, taking their perspective. What do you think their unmet need or feeling that they're expressing in their behavior towards you? And with this insight, taking a moment to focus on your needs and on the other person's needs. And see if your feelings are still the same. Just noticing if by focusing on your needs and their needs, there's any softening, any common ground that you found. And then taking a moment to reflect, what would it mean for you to extend, to offer compassion to this person? What would offering compassion to this person look like? Extending compassion. What would that look like in terms of your behavior or your words, or maybe even just your thoughts, a change of perspective? If you could really sincerely offer heartfelt compassion to this person, what would that feel like? And when we disagree with someone, when we're in conflict with someone, we often focus so much on the differences. But take a moment to reflect on the things you have in common with this person. Maybe you live in the same town. Maybe you both have children. Maybe your children go to the same school. Maybe you both have a partner. Maybe you both have aging parents. Probably they've had their heart broken like you had. Maybe they've lost a loved one. So instead of focusing on the differences, take a few moments and focus on what you share in common with this person at the very broadest level, all the human experience, all the emotions, the needs, but also probably other specific things that you share with this person. And when you focus on these commonalities, do they help you see the person in a new light instead of seeing them as someone so different from us or a member of an out group? Seeing the person as an individual, somebody whose feelings and needs and experiences might overlap with yours. Take a moment to just focus on this, on your common humanity. See how this feels. And if you feel that through this contemplation, your heart is softened a bit towards this person, maybe feels more open, sit for a moment and really savor that feeling. If you feel more openness, more connection, perhaps even empathy and compassion, just sitting for a moment and savoring that feeling. Thank you for your practice. So I'd love to hear, we have a nice, generous amount of time for some discussion at this point. Any reflections on either that practice or some of the ideas or questions or your own experiences? Perhaps some of you have been involved in bridging work and have some experiences to share. I see some hands shooting up already. Do we have the handheld mic? Okay. Uh-oh.
Hello. Yep. Um, I wonder if you could just for an introduction or for basics, you know, I hear often like you need to be brave to admit like you're wrong, or you need to be strong to be vulnerable. And it's not that I disagree with that, but I wonder if you could give like just an introduction of like why does that take strength? Why does that take bravery?
Yeah. Oh, wow. How much time do we have? You know, when you said that, it reminded me of something that happened probably more than 30 years ago. And went to see one of my Tibetan teachers with a friend, and the friend had a question, and he said, why is it in all the traditional Tibetan Buddhist texts, they talk about the brave bodhisattvas, you know, the courageous bodhisattvas? How is extending compassion take courage? You know, how is being empathetic? How is, and you gave the example of admitting that you're wrong. And, you know, the teacher said, it's because opening our heart takes courage. Trusting others, taking a risk to trust others and to be open to others and extend kindness to others, armoring ourselves, right? And closing off is a way we protect ourselves. And so opening our hearts takes courage because it means opening ourselves to the risk of being hurt, opening ourselves to the risk of being disappointed, opening ourselves to the risk of loss. When we love and when we connect with others, it risks losing them, right? And so I think all of these things, like how sometimes we think, you know, from the stories we hear about bravery, bravery means being more adversarial and having the most amount of weapons and shields and all of that. Actually, it's totally the opposite. You know, the bravest thing that we can do is risk loving and risk being open and risk being wrong. We armor ourselves, we reinforce. I mean, in Buddhism, we say the ignorance that misperceives the way we exist, and look at how much of our actions are reinforcing this sense of self, justifying what we do, deflecting any criticism. So you mentioned saying that we're wrong. Wow, that means really letting our guard down and letting down that tendency that we have to constantly be wanting to reinforce this sense of self that isn't even real. It doesn't even exist. It's like we're spending all of our energy, 100% of our energy, 24/7, reinforcing a ghost. It doesn't even exist. This idea of how we really are, reinforcing, you know, warding off any threats and just going, oh, I was wrong. You're right. Let me listen to you. Let me be curious. Let me change my opinion. That takes courage, right? So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what's coming up for me with your question, which is a real beautiful one of like, why does softening and opening and being soft and kind and compassionate the bravest thing we could do? Because it's the risk of trusting and being hurt and being disappointed and lost. But that's what it is to be human. I want all of it in my human experience. I don't want to protect myself from any of that, because then that means that I'm not loving and I'm not opening to others and I'm not committed. Yeah, thank you.
You made me think of something I learned, I think, back in college, that the Druids felt that they had power over something if they named it, right? Once they named it, they owned it. And I feel like this is part of the problem that I see, that we pigeonhole people with language. So I had a Dharma talk on the spiritual warrior, I think it was over a month ago. And somebody kept saying, those murderers, those murderers. And I kind of didn't know how to respond, but I wanted to say, they're humans.
Yeah.
Right. And that we use these terms, murderers, alcoholics, drug addicts. They're humans.
Yeah.
Right. But we use these terms to pigeonhole people and objectify them.
Right.
I mean, it's so much easier to hate somebody when you've put them in a hole and you've defined the hole.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what you say, Linda, reminds me of one of my total heroes is Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. And he often says, just because someone's stolen something, they're not just a thief.
Right.
Just because, even if someone's killed someone, they're not just a murderer.
Right.
Right. And so a lot of us, I mean, it might seem convoluted, but a lot of us, I noticed myself training in different ways of describing people and using more describing their experience rather than either an adjective or a noun. Like I talk about my students experiencing incarceration. I will never say criminal, prisoner, or even incarcerated person, because then that's reifying that aspect of what they're experiencing. A lot of us talk about someone experiencing homelessness or houselessness instead of that homeless person even. Because I think the closer that we get to reducing an experience to one noun, then we've succeeded really well in all the practices that I'm saying we need to kind of critique and push back against. Because like you say, then if they're a murderer, why do they need compassion? They're a murderer. But not seeing, oh, they're also a son and a father and a Buddhist meditator. I mean, so many of my students, when I was teaching in prison, I have a new podcast series kind of based on this idea of bridging divides. It's called Voices of Love. And my last episode, this is not an advertisement. I know it really sounds like it, and it's not, but it was just because this just happened last week. I talked to a friend of mine who's an expert in restorative justice, just all about restorative processes. And she works with people who are both survivors and perpetrators of crimes of sexual violence. And she's the survivor of child sexual abuse herself, and she talks quite openly about this. And we were talking because the last group of people experiencing incarceration that I taught, and the last thing I did before COVID was lead this group of sex offenders through the compassion training, the Stanford compassion training. It lasted about a year because they kept having lockdowns in this prison. So what should have taken 8 weeks took about a year. But it was the most awesome experience. And she and I were talking about that. People who, even in the prison system, are the most vilified, have very short lifespans in prison, have to be in segregation for their own protection. Like I had to go into a special protected yard to teach these students, you know, because they were convicted of crimes of sexual violence. So yeah, and incredible compassion meditators. And that's how I saw them, even knowing that some of them felt the need to confess, you know, and I heard some really gnarly stories. And so for me, it was a great example of, wow, this is my student that I've known for years. That's amazing. And he just told me what he did. And that was a really hard story to hear. So I got a lot of practice, like holding the both and. And I think that's part of this work too. Both and. Both are true. It's not ignoring one or the other. Both things are true. My Catholic priest friend, my dear friend who doesn't think that women should be priests and have equal rights in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. Both things are true. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. So in the experience that you led, I realized that the two individuals, well, me and the other individual I chose, um, I think both of us, from what I know, I know a fair amount about both persons, myself included. Um, both for different reasons and in different cultures and different types of families, did not get the listening and the attention, the compassionate, present attention that they need. So I'm always trying to find it, to get it, you know. I mean, I'm like a junkie for it, you know. And the other person is sort of, but the other person needs it too. So it brings up a particular type of conflict. And one thing I've learned to do is just be very mindful of it and just feel the conflict. But there's another step. The other step, and the exercise helps with getting in touch with that other step, is to see that that person has the same longing that I have. I understand that longing, you know, because I'm hungry for that. But my way of getting it blocks that person getting what they want. So I have to do a complete 180-degree shift and look at what do they need? And what do they need? They need listening with curiosity. That's simple and that difficult.
Like I said, it's a short list of things that we all need. And it's just a question of like the willingness to put yourself in their shoes. And often it's like holding up a mirror. So often. I think even especially with people that we're in conflict with, the mirror shows even more of a reflection of what we need. Because I found exactly the same thing that you have, like, it's my turn now to be listened, you know, to have you listen to me. It's not all about one side or the other, but we both have that need and that longing, like you say, especially if we didn't experience enough of it growing up. It's almost like you can't get enough. And we need to realize, oh, the other person needs exactly the same thing. So extending that generosity of like, I know how great it feels to have somebody really get me. Can I offer that to someone else? You know, in the Buddhist path, we talk about generosity we talk about different kinds of giving and different kinds of generosity. It's one of the paramitas or the perfection. Man, I think just listening deeply is such an act of generosity that we can offer to others. Because sometimes we're like, I don't have that much and I don't make that much money and my rent. What do I give? What do I give? Give your attention, give your time, the generosity of time, attention, deep listening, reflecting back to them. It's amazing. It's such a gift. So I think when we realize what it feels like for us to receive it, then we can extend that to the other person. I'm really glad that this meditation helped you see that connection. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Yeah, there's that.
Hi, hello. This is my first time coming here. Yeah, thank you. I had a hard time with the meditation because I have inattentive ADHD, so getting myself grounded was kind of hard. That's why I was kind of laughing a little bit earlier. So I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to ask, like, in regards to compassion and empathy, where does that ground lead to forgiveness? Because that's what I have a hard time with. Like, if there's someone that hurts me, I have a hold grudge. And it's hard for me to admit that because as much as it seems like I've moved forward with my life, there's always something that kind of chains me down in a way because of how much pain. So where would like empathy and compassion come in when it comes to forgiveness?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a big topic too, and such a beautiful one. One thing I want to offer, because I found this both for myself and for some other people, is sometimes we think that forgiveness includes letting the person back in and reestablishing a relationship, a trusting relationship with the person. And so sometimes if we've been hurt a lot, that just doesn't feel safe. So sometimes we hold a grudge as a way to keep that person out there and protect ourselves. But a lot of the work with forgiveness shows that we can forgive somebody, and it doesn't mean we need to renew the relationship. Renewing the relationship depends on trust. That's a whole next step. And that person may never be worthy of our trust again. Can we understand? Can we extend empathy and compassion and still have a boundary to go, you stay out there, I'll forgive you as long as you stay over there. I'm not going to let you back in because I have no information showing that you've changed and that you're trustworthy and that you won't hurt me again. You know, there's a beautiful book, I mentioned it yesterday for the people who are here. I think it's called the Book of Forgiveness by Bishop Desmond Tutu and his daughter Mafo Tutu. And it has this beautiful, very simple kind of four-part path to forgiveness. The last one, which is really important, he says, renewing or releasing the relationship. So we have a choice in the end. Do I want that person back in my life or not? That depends on trust. We can forgive somebody and not trust them again. And that's tricky. And sometimes I think holding the grudge is the way we keep that person separate because we feel like somehow if we forgive, we need to let them back in. So differentiating forgiveness from renewing the relationship to me has been really helpful because it's like, now I understand why you did what you did. It hurt me a lot, but I'm trying to extend empathy and compassion to you. So I forgive you, but I don't trust you anymore. I don't want you back in my life. Does that help at all?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
It's also my first time here too, but relating to her question about forgiveness, sorry, it's just like about forgiving oneself because we've made many mistakes as humans, and I also am not like the best person, and I am trying to be better. But how does like one figure out like, oh, you're like when you can forgive yourself
Yeah.
for the things you've done?
You guys are asking the most awesome questions, and I wish we had another hour and a half to talk about forgiveness. You know, for me, I tell a story sometimes of when I was in my first long meditation retreat. So in the Tibetan tradition, we have this 3-year, 3-month, 3-day, 3 hours, 3-minute, 3 nanosecond thing. And I always say, you think you're a really nice person until you go into solitary confinement with your mind and all of your history for like years. And so I remember this thing that happened about 6 months into my first retreat, my first long retreat, where I kind of realized what a jerk I'd been. Like I'd always kind of thought I was a nice person. And then in that solitude, all the times that I'd hurt people and all the times I'd just been a jerk, all came up, and it was just sort of flooding. You know, they say when you're falling off a cliff, your life flashes before your eyes. This was like that, except it was 3 days of every time I'd hurt someone in my life. It was awful. It was so awful. And because I have way too many planets in Virgo for my own good, I made a list of all the ways that I hurt. But, you know, I'm just kind of wallowing in this shame and this guilt. And then I remember it was almost like hearing my departed mother's voice going, quit doing this. This isn't doing any good at all. You just need to forgive yourself. And so really it was like hearing my departed mother, you know, I was hallucinating a little bit at that point. I think it was all very intense. But I remember going, oh, did I ever really want to intend maliciously to hurt people? Mostly not. Mostly I'm doing what we all do, fumbling around, trying to find happiness and avoid suffering in some kind of like clumsy way. And other people got in the way. That's all. Like when I checked my heart, mostly I wasn't like staying up all night trying to figure out how to harm someone ever. It was just, I was clueless about how to find happiness and avoid suffering. And other people, what did George book? Collateral damage, unfortunately. Right. And so in that moment, I was like, oh, I'm just kind of this mixed bag, trying and then giving myself credit for trying harder and like really embarking on the spiritual path and going, okay, I'm probably still going to hurt people a lot. I'm not done. I'm not a finished product by any means. And I'll stay stuck in shame and guilt if I don't learn how to forgive myself a little bit, because it's paralyzing and we need to move on. And I think for me, it's almost like perfectionism and low self-esteem are like one continuum. If we didn't expect ourselves to be so perfect, we wouldn't feel so much shame. If we just shrug our shoulders and go, mixed bag, doing my best, try harder next time. So it's like the self-acceptance that allows for the self-forgiveness and realizing where we are and that we still are going to have faults. And, so, you know, I hurt people probably all the time, still, even trying my best for so long. So just the self-acceptance that leads to the self-forgiveness and not expecting that we're going to be perfect quite yet. Hope that helps.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Good. And we probably need to do the dedication because we're nearly at time. But before we dedicate, I just want to say thank you all so much for coming this morning. Hopefully there's sprinkling some seeds of bridging divides to create a more compassionate world for all of us.